What are you hoping to achieve by coming here today?
Well, I'm hoping to help show the abhorrence that a lot of Australians have for this visit and how insulting that is in the context of our multicultural community.
Thousands of protesters are here in Sydney. It's Monday night, and they're demonstrating against the controversial visit by Israeli President Isaac Herzog. He was invited here by the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, after the Bondi terror attack. Earlier in the day, he visited Bondi and laid a wreath to honour the 15 people killed in the attack. But these protesters say Herzog is not welcome.
The fact that our government has invited a member of the Israeli government here to represent Jews, I think is highly offensive to many in the Jewish community.
He's a person who has said that all Palestinian people are responsible for what happened on October 7 and has incited that demonisation of a whole group of people. That's just not just, and he shouldn't be here. Yeah.
The New South Wales government put limits on the march and protesters challenged it. They lost in a last-minute decision by the court. But they won't be silenced.
It's just inconceivable that people who are trying to stop the murder of children, families, of people in Palestine should not be able to freely protest what is going on.
And they represent a sort of opportunistic push from the New South Wales governments to stop protests, particularly protests against the genocide in Palestine.
I'm Nicole Johnston, and you're listening to 7am. Today, President of the New South Wales Council for Civil Liberties, Timothy Roberts, on whether the right to protest is under threat and what this means for the rest of the country. It's Tuesday, February 10. Tim, could you explain what this court case was about and your reaction to the ruling?
Well, the court case was about the Minns government using another set of powers that it had on its books, essentially some rules around special events and the ability of the police to use powers to move on crowds of people and to disperse crowds with respect to those events. And there was a question from the Palestine Action Group, in particular, as to whether or not this was a valid use of that legislation and that power. And ultimately, the judge decided it was.
And what else did the judge have to say about it?
Well, nothing. Basically, the judge made the decision without reasons. It's common for them to provide it later for scrutiny. And I think it was the option of the court to get him out as quickly as possible, given the impact they had on the event and the protests themselves. But really, it wasn't something that was ventilated at the time.
Tim, have we ever seen these types of powers given to the police before, or these types of major event laws used in this way to restrict a protest?
Not in this context. This is unusual, where these powers are used as big events, where there's needed a large police presence and there's issues of crowds and stuff. So you can think about, big sporting events and the like. So using it in this context is new, and the concern, therefore, is that the police will be able to draw on this power in the future going forward and use it to suppress and disperse crowds in protests. And so the court has made a decision that many might not agree with. What is unequivocal is that we have a legislator, our government, that has been passing laws and giving police far too much power to control these events and to restrict and interfere with our protests. So when it comes to a decision we don't agree with, that's based on laws that are on the books, if you don't agree with that, that's a question then you need to take to your local member of parliament and something you might need to take to the ballot box next time if you don't agree with what's happened.
Coming up, what does this all mean for freedom of expression? Tim, we've seen wide restrictions on protests in New South Wales since the Bondi attack. What do these laws actually do?
So the laws that were introduced after the Bondi attack empowered the police commissioner to make a declaration that particular areas are designated to be assembly-free, essentially. So that is to say there's a prohibition against seeking authorisation to have an assembly. Very broad powers, and being particularly vague about what area means, because they are as vague as that in the laws. And we saw over the period after Bondi, and when the laws were passed, the police do just that, declare large swathes of Sydney to be free from authorised protest, and then restricting that depending on the particular circumstances that were evolving as to what protests they would allow or not allow to be authorised. It's a really, really concerning feature or development that's changed with these laws, is the involvement of the police commissioner now in these decisions about what protests can and can't be authorised.
Is it the role of the police to step between the animosity in part of the population and a foreign leader, to make a declaration about people's sort of political views about that leader?
No, my view is purely on community safety. I need to balance up the level of animosity about his visit with the need for community safety, and that's what we've done again.
So where before there was this broad recognition that we all had that right, that unequivocal right to protest and then also seek authorisation of protest, now in these events the police commissioner says quite broadly, no one can. And so while, what happened in Bondi was obviously the beginning of this particular law, you saw it impact communities related to Venezuela, communities related to Iran, other international, events, other circumstances. Invasion Day was a big one. Those communities were also impacted by these laws. So it was really quite a stark example of a law affecting one group, or passed with the intention to protect one group, impacting us all.
Tim, the state government says that its new protest laws are short-term, that they don't formally ban all protest. They say they're trying to reduce tension in the community around the Herzog visit.
It's about balancing the right to protest alongside the understandable responsibility of the New South Wales government and the police to protect the visiting head of state, as well as mourners, as well as protesters and regular Sydney-siders who are going about their job on a Monday afternoon. We're trying to get that balance right.
How convincing is that argument to you, and what could be the long-term impact of the crackdown?
I think the long-term impact of the crackdown is that we have a community that changes its understanding of what its rights are. It started with an unequivocal right to assembly and political communication. It's one of the few rights that are protected in our Constitution. But it's a right that we only really have if we use it and know we have it. And the concern is that as a community that we change our understanding, we lose our rights. That's the start of it. But I don't think that is a particularly convincing argument at all. I think it's one of those ones that is used with things like social cohesion and the like. I keep bringing this to the idea that, yeah, sure, if an angry dad coming home shouts at a family for it to be quiet because they're annoying him, sure, the thing that's frustrated the issue goes away, but it's not peace, it's not cohesion, it's not safe. If we want to be in a safe community, we have to have ideas be contested, and we have to do it in public spaces. And that's what assembly and political communication is. So if we have laws that put in the police hands the ability to control that, we've got a real problem, because we'll see some groups get allowed to assemble and others not, and others sort of be permitted, and rules change for some. That's the division. That's the division, is when some voices are listened to and not others. And I truly believe the animosity in the environment now, the tension, the stress that is come about because of the intervention of the government in trying to silence protest and intervene. So it's actively doing the opposite of what they're saying it can do. And as this time passes and we heal as a community, we've got to be really worried then about what happens to our right to assemble around issues like climate change, or your workers' rights, or, some other circumstance we want to assemble about, the actions of the Min's government. We now have an environment where those rights have been eroded, and we might not be able to avail ourselves of them as readily. And that's the worry. Ultimately, it's about keeping our government to account and letting them know what our views are. And we're not getting close to that goal.
Now, separately, we have a number of activist groups. They've filed another Supreme Court challenge against these broader restrictions that were brought in after Bondi. What is that case about?
It's about whether or not, again, the new laws are valid. So every time there's a constitutional challenge, if you will, to laws like this, you're balancing the question about whether or not there was a purpose, in the one sense, a valid purpose for them, and whether or not, because they are an infringement on these key rights to our democracy, so whether or not that burden on that particular right in New South Wales has been overly done. And the groups that are challenging the laws are saying that the balance isn't right, and there's an impermissible burden on our right to communicate with each other because of them. And the hope from these groups is that the laws will be wound back as a result.
Tim, we're seeing these New South Wales restrictions in the middle of a wider debate about cracking down on protests all over the country. Queensland is set to introduce the first hate speech laws banning 2 pro-Palestinian slogans. What does all of this say about how Australia's trying to balance that idea of social cohesion with freedom of expression?
I think it says that we have a real failing of political leadership in our country, quite frankly. We have a community in distress, we have pain, we've had decades of understanding that to have reconciliation, to have cohesion, we need to have truth-telling and speak and exchange. And yet we have leadership that is troubled by difficult times is choosing to use a regressive approach to that. So as opposed to allowing truth-telling, allowing disputes to happen. So if we have governments and leadership that have this view of our democracy where it's okay to regressively approach our ability to tell the truth to each other, it's a failing of political leadership. My call to the community is to understand and educate themselves about their rights. There's lots of ways they can look for more information about their rights, because if they did, I think there'd be more front of mind about what's happening and why this approach is being taken. It is interesting that the federal government and the New South Wales government, who have taken the lead in this regressive approach, are both states and governments that do not have a Human Rights Act in this country, do not have human rights front and centre of political public decisions. While, yes, some of the other states that have followed do, I think it's telling that in those communities where it's not part of our public discourse, our front-of-mind understanding of our rights, that those rights have been eroded first. So I think it's time for us to get better acquainted with our rights and our understanding about how our democracy works.
Tim, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Also in the news, the Australian man behind New Zealand's deadliest mass shooting, which saw 51 Muslim worshippers killed, is in court, attempting to have his guilty pleas thrown out. Brenton Tarrant claims he was not in a fit state to plead guilty to the terrorism, murder and attempted murder charges in 2019. He's testified that he felt forced to admit the crimes because of the harsh prison conditions. And Aussie Super Bowl superstar Michael Dixon is celebrating after being labelled the real MVP in the Seattle Seahawks' 29-13 win over the Patriots. Dixon played a starring role in the victory. He's just the second Australian to start and win a Super Bowl. I'm Nicole Johnston. This is 7am. Catch you later.